mistake, things we've thought about, because the ancient belief of the whole flat Earth thing is like, oh, the water's going to fall off the edge. I'm going, no, because the Antarctic coastline is so huge. One, it's very, very tall. It's not Game of Thrones tall, but it's very, very tall. It's 150, 200 feet straight up of ice. And then what's interesting is the continent, which is unlike any other continent that's out there. It's this giant plateau. Most people don't even know. It's like most of this huge expanse of ice, regardless whether you think it's a continent or a giant ring around us, is at about 7,000 feet. It's huge. That's minimum distance. And then it goes up higher and higher. It's just this giant flat area with nothing on it. And if you're down there trying to explore, I mean, you couldn't ask for, again, if the system was made deliberately, and it was, in my opinion, then you couldn't ask for better negative reinforcement. Let's say you're taking a ship down there, right? Even an early metal ship back in the day, right? You're getting within, 200 miles of the shore, maybe, and you already see icebergs. If that doesn't turn you around, once you get to the shoreline, you get sheer wall of ice, just to get on dry land. And it's not even dry land when you get up there; it's still ice. And then once you get up there, with whatever supplies you brought with you, that's what you have to survive on, because there's nothing to cut down. There's no game to shoot unless you're eating penguins, and that's only going to buy you so much time. And then once you decide to head inland, you don't know how long it's going to be before you. I mean, it's just a horrible. The place just screams, go away. So the government didn't have to do too much. All they had to do was kind of do some subtle nudging here and there, and all of our civilization never decided to go.
Well, obviously, Hitler had an idea, and along with his submarines, were already down there. And from what I'm seeing from Admiral Byrd's diary or his flight log, that was something that he'd run into.
Now that was during the only break that Admiral Byrd had during his tours, his Antarctic tours, which was during World War II. Everybody that was down on the ice left the ice to go do the World War II thing, right? Except for one country. And that was Nazi Germany. And that turns into a straight-up Raiders of the Lost Ark type scenario, which is great. I mean, that's some great storytelling right there. I'm wondering if Spielberg might have grabbed some of it, which is they were the only ones down there. Why was Germany down there during World War II? It was because they were looking – the stories weren't wrong. They were looking for anything metaphysical, anything ethereal that's out there that could help them win the war. Why not? If you could find a secret weapon like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail or whatever it is, you're going to use it. And so after World War II was over, and Admiral Byrd was literally there at the end, he was at the signing ceremony in the Japanese harbor. I think, was MacArthur there? I can't remember. He might have been there too. And he was there for the signing. And right afterwards, they launched a massive military operation called Operation High Jump. Now, it wasn't like the Normandy operation, anything like that. It was a full-blown carrier group. He took a full-blown military operation down to Antarctica. And to this day, they will never say what it was really for. They were saying, for scientific research. It's like, really, it's a full-blown battle group. With support ships, the whole 9 yards. And you went down there with a carrier group, and he was the guy that led them. And the stories that are coming out of that they're so wide. They cover such a wide band of possibilities. But the one that I liked, there's two things that happened here. One, whatever happened was over and pretty much forgotten by the time, and this was in 1946. So World War II ended in 1945. 1946 was when Operation High Jump was happening down there. And when he gets down there, whatever he did accomplished its goal in one form or another, whether or not, whatever opponent he had faced down there. If they were trying to root out the Nazi bases, that's one thing. But it was obviously over and done with, because by the time 1954 rolled around, which is only 8 years later, there were lots of countries down there, and everything seemed to be business as usual. So whatever the Nazi problem was in 1954 was gone. It was long gone. There wasn't even an issue. So what happened to the remaining Nazi forces if they were down there? Now, the story that I like was that, and I can't remember where I read it, but it was an interesting little story, was that there was some sort of ancient civilization down there. I'm not saying they're from another planet. I'm just saying that anything you think is a UFO is probably just older versions of us, older civilizations. You can, if you want to call them interdimensional, that's one thing, but they're not from Mars or Venus or anything like that. They're just from here. No different than what would happen if we all of a sudden, flew fighter planes over an Aborigine population that had never seen that before, or we could go on and on. Like that one, what was that wonderful island tribe that we used them as a staging base for supplies for World War II, and we brought them all this cool stuff. Their technology was way beyond anything they ever seen, and they were so sad that they wanted us to come back that they made Gilligan's Island versions of planes as altars, to hoping that we would come back with these little planes. I thought it was fantastic. Anyway, where was I going with this? What was the initial question?
heading in towards the ice, or the finding out about the Nazi bases.
Oh yeah, the Nazi bases. So the story that I like. Sorry, I go off into the weeds sometimes, and I completely lose track, and this is one of my gifts. Or curses. So when they went out there, if you believe the story, was that an ancient civilization was out there on the ice, and Germany knew it, and they didn't have the military forces to stop this carrier fleet, and so they asked this other, the old civilization for asylum, and the older civilization said, okay, you can come with us, but if you come with us, you can't come back. It's kind of like a junior high dance type of thing. Once you leave, you're not getting back in, and that was it. They left, but the rule was what the rule was, and I believe this. I believe in protocols, and that sort of makes sense to me. Which is, you want to join the basement club and hang out with these other civilizations? Fine, you can do it, but you're not going back to yours. That's it, because there's certain protocols that cannot be broken. Sort of like the same argument that people will throw out there. Well, they'll say, people that try to dismiss UFOs, and I say, regardless whether the UFOs come from, you do understand. In fact, Star Trek did a little thing on this in not the last movie, but the one that was the one before this one, which was, you don't let the indigenous population see you in all what you're doing, because if they do, you can alter their history, especially if they're a religious-based culture. And that's why what never happens here. They say, why isn't a UFO landed on the White House lawn? It's like, no, you can't. You can't just come down and shake hands, take pictures, sign a few autographs, and leave. You'd change everything. Even now, you would change something. I mean, forget about landing in the 1950s. I mean, let's say you did it back in the 1800s. If you did it in the 1800s, they had no idea what to do. If you were in the 1700s, you might think you were demons. And in fact, hundreds of years before that, you might think you were demons. And if anyone thinks that all this is kind of wild out there, I challenge you. You want to look at something, look at the greatest UFO event of all time, and you're thinking, oh, it's Roswell. No, it is not Roswell. It is the 1561 Nuremberg event. You can find it on Wiki. It is probably the finest, most elaborate UFO spaceship gathering of all time, and done for a solid hour over Germany. Nuremberg, a big city back in the 1500s, and they were there long enough that all the sketch artists came out and drew the whole thing. And you're thinking, okay, what's the point? The point is that protocols have to be in place. Older civilizations cannot interact directly and change the history or change the future of the civilization that's currently living on the surface, and which is why the 1561 Nuremberg event, none of those ships touched down. Nobody got out, talked to anybody. They just left. And I think if you want me to go into it, I can. But that's why the last group of ships that came in chased the others off. They were like the UN building or the UN troops. There's rules, and one of it is every civilization has to develop naturally, kind of like our prime directive that we put in Star Trek. You don't want. I mean, it's so easy to influence budding civilizations that you don't, if you want them to be authentic, you can't mess with them. I mean, yeah, you could pick off a few people in some mountains or the water or woods or whatever, but you can't land in Main Street anywhere and just start messing up things. Anyway.
Well, when the military went down there, they did run into opposition.
I'm sorry, say it one more time, you cut out.
When the military went down there, they did run into opposition?
I had heard that story as well, and depending on how far you want to go with it, yeah, I mean, I'd heard the stories about how the carrier group ran into advanced fighter technology, and that they lost a few people, and that they were beaten back, that they were driven back. Is it possible? Sure it is. But could it also be? Let's put it this way: if it wasn't decisive, though, if there wasn't, let's say they went down there and then they did engage in, I wouldn't say just the Nazis, but this advanced technology, and it could have been a minor skirmish, but whatever it was, they didn't send any future operations down there. Now, they may have been told, you know what, go home, you don't have to worry about the Germans anymore, we will take care of them, and they will never be a part of your world again. And at that point, it's okay, so it's kind of a push. It's not necessarily a win. I mean, you didn't get to say that you crushed the Nazi fleet, at least not publicly. In fact, it's a story that you're going to squash as much as you can, because even if you don't, in fact, you sign gag orders as much as you can, you limit the amount of troop involvement, and make sure that nobody spills the beans when they get home. Of course, it sounds like a few people did, because people are going to talk, kind of like Roswell. But whatever it was, it doesn't bother me too much, because again, by 1954, the lead guy, the guy that led the charge down there, he didn't seem to care. You watched his face, he didn't even talk about it. It was like Antarctica was just another day for him.
Well, I know in his flight logs, he did eventually run into types of flying saucers and everything. Why don't we go in that direction so we can start heading down in the hole? Sure.
The Admiral Byrd, of course, depending on what you look at, do I believe that all of his diaries are authentic? Or flight logs? Maybe. But since he flew, I mean, yeah, of course, the man, he flew enough planes, and he flew planes back when, there were things known as the Foo Fighters. And the Foo Fighters, of course, not just a band that is based off those little weird colored dots that would fly around planes during World War II. They seemed like probes or cameras or whatever you want to call them. But it was interesting that both sides thought they were the other. So the Germans thought it was us and the British, and we thought it was the Germans. Well, why wouldn't we think it was the Germans? The Germans had such advanced technology. So, Admiral Byrd, of course he saw a lot of stuff, but he couldn't talk about it that much because he was still considered, remember, spaceship, the whole UFO sci-fi world didn't even really come into existence till the later part of his life. The early movies, like the Day the Earth Stood Still and When Worlds Collide, they didn't come along till later, till the 50s. So whatever he saw, you didn't really talk about that much because it wasn't that people would label you crazy, because people didn't know how to react. UFOs weren't even a real thing. You got to remember, the first coined term for flying saucer was Kenneth Arnold, which was up here in the Northwest, next to Mount Rainier, of all things,
right,
where he was flying above them, and a training operation where there was I say training because I've seen the same groups using night vision in Colorado, which is small ships, small craft, not very big, about the size of cars, maybe a little bigger, and they're all linked together by some sort of electromagnetic tether, and they, for safety reasons, nobody bumps into each other. And it seems like, honestly, every time I watch them, it seemed like driver's ed. It's like, oh, I get it, you're teaching them to fly. It's very cute. But he saw them from above. He was flying. They were flying above the tree line in the Northwest near Mount Rainier, and he said that's where he came up with the whole. They look like upside down tea saucers. They had that sort of dimension. So, are you still there?
Yes. So when Admiral Byrd, from his logs and everything, it says how he then was surrounded and they took him to a certain point, or he saw an opening in the ice and all that. What do you think went on?
Whatever that was either suppressed or discredited as much as possible. I mean, the only thing that I know about the diary stuff was, again, it's tough for me to look at it all as, you don't know which parts to pick out and believe. I mean, you can, everyone's got their favorites, of course, but if he was taken inside the core, or inside some sort of hollow earth theory, again, it wouldn't have to be very big, not at all. Even a 10-mile high opening would be nothing. It'd be more than big enough for a plane. Planes can operate in much smaller distances than that. But if he was taken in there and if it was of high importance, they would have kept him there. they would have made up reasons, and he would have kept going to the North Pole. But instead, again, he just kept doing South Pole, South Pole, South Pole, because again, it made sense. At that point, you think about it. If you're the authority, you want to confirm what is going on. You want to confirm the old maps. And the first thing you need to do, again, is to create the boundary. And they did that brilliantly, because once you have the center point, okay, fine, let's find the first outer edge. That took a long, long time, even with refueling, which meant the outer edge is thousands of miles from the coastline of Antarctica. It's not like the Antarctica. The edge is not what everyone thinks it's this hard edge. Oh, the Antarctica, that's it. That's the edge of the world. No, it's probably thousands of miles inward, enough that if you have decent prop planes back in the 1950s, you still weren't finding it. And you, of course, you're going to search in a grid pattern. You're not, but eventually you're going to figure it out. But do I believe that everything they said about the North Pole was true? Maybe, or was it a decent distraction enough that it kept people from looking at the real target? Because that's how I got into flat Earth. Was I looked at the only reason I got into flat Earth was that when I was looking at Antarctica, Richard Byrd's name came up. In fact, if his name hadn't come up as many times down in Antarctica, I probably wouldn't have paid that much attention to it. And then, I started putting the things together, all the weird things, the high altitude nuclear weapons testing, and by the United States and Soviet Union, and then the Antarctic Treaty, and then NASA being formed, and then it just keeps going on and on from there.
Well, I understand too that 2002, a California TV crew disappeared who went down there to film the documentation of some type of terrain underneath the ice. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I'd heard about it. Again, if they were down there and they went to the wrong place, they are going to be taken care of. This is the big reason that you cannot underestimate what the powers that be will do to keep certain secrets. This thing is so important that you don't even want to let corporations go. You will rather sacrifice billions of dollars in generated revenue to keep people out of there because they say, well, why would the Antarctic Treaty be so important? Because if you're an oil corporation that has billions at revenue that you can get in multiple different forms, then what happens if you have a plane? Because remember, you can get lost down there pretty easily. You have one of your survey planes goes off course. Are you going to track this plane? Are you going to tail it? How many are you going to be able to tail it without them knowing that you're tailing it? What if they start going into a zone where you don't want them to be, where there's things happening that you don't want them to see? What happens then? And then on top of that, if you are this corporation and you start encroaching on things, it's like, well, we want to survey this area and survey this area. You get to the point where the government says, yeah, you can't go past this point. And you're the corporation. You go, why? Why not? It's like, well, national security. It's like, what are you talking about, national security? Nobody owns Antarctica. There's just too many weird, awkward discussions and situations where, as a government or the authority or the powers that be, you don't want to be involved in. So it's all or nothing. So at that point, you just tell them, it's like, you know what? It's just going to be easier if we just shut this whole thing down and not let anybody come in here. And it's worked. It's worked really well. What surprised me, though, is how well they've controlled the media side of things. Meaning, if I'm the head of, let's say, ExxonMobil, right, and I've got a lot of money, I can frack in your backyard right now if I wanted to. I'm not only am I not allowed to go down to Antarctica, I'm not even allowed to talk about it. That's the part that raised eyebrows for me, which was, look, I'm the head of ExxonMobil. I know the editor at the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Washington Post and so on and so on. Why can't I go into one of these newspapers and say for years and years and run a full-page ad? Full-page ads would have been fairly cheap back in the day. And say, it'd be really great for my company to go down to Antarctica. And they're not even allowed to do that. And lobbyists down in Washington, D.C. in the States, they have the most powerful thing that's out there. They can influence anybody. Lobbyists aren't. When's the last time you even saw a story anywhere? And this is the internet age. Yeah. When's you saw a story of anybody that's fighting to get rights to go into Antarctica? It's unheard of. It's what's conspiracy is bigger than money, and this is it. It doesn't. This is beyond money. That money, because this goes into a whole culture fragmentation. potentially of bad things that could happen. Look, if there's even a 2% chance that the population would turn to pitchforks and torches and start going after people, you're not going to do it. You're not going to. The board meeting on this decision to keep this thing a secret probably lasted about 10 minutes. And people's like, okay, what could happen that was bad? It's like, what are you talking about? You mean like educationally, financially, spiritually? Take your pick. The whole thing could come crumbling down around our ears in a matter of a month. It's like, yeah, okay, we're going to drag this thing out as long as we can. And again, it's done really, really well up until very, very recently. And now, for whatever reason, either they're laying it out or we're discovering it.
When we get towards the entrances or whatever way would be into the Earth itself, do you think that it's ice covered? Do you think that there's vegetation around it? You know, Google Earth has kind of blacked a lot of things out. What do you think?
Well, one, you can't trust Google Earth anyway, or the GPS system, because it's all fabricated. So kind of like GPS system, people say, well, no, I use GPS to do stuff. It's like, look, GPS was designed by the United States Department of Defense back in the 90s. It's pure military, so they can not only, on small doses, they can tell you where to go to get your morning coffee, but they can also guide your plane around things. If they don't want you near something, they can correct the course in that plane in 2 seconds. Most planes pretty much fly themselves. But when it comes to the hiding, things like the any entrances, they're well hidden, and they've had 6 decades to do it in almost an unlimited budget. The only thing that they have a limit on is technology to do it with, and so you might as well ask at that point I'd answer it the same way I do when people say, what's the firmament or what's the dome made out of? So take your pick. You know, if you're into science fiction, there's a half a dozen disciplines you could turn on. You know, is it a high frequency? Is it a electromagnetic field? Is it a heavy element? Is it a heavy water? Whatever force field technology you want to come up with, take your pick. It could be used, but whatever it is, it's probably using some sort of stealth material, so that even if random something or other came by it, they wouldn't notice it. Wouldn't be glaring. Well, wouldn't be red.
Yeah, I've seen lots of claims that once inside, there's lakes or oceans or even suns, all kinds of other types of inhabitants, whether they're human or reptilian or whatever. What have you come across?
Yeah, some of the stories. If you want to look at there's only so much we can cover in this program, but if you want to look at some follow-up stories, look at something. 2 terms, real easy to remember. One's called the King of the Earth, and the other one's called the Smoky God. Smoky God is very, very interesting, about other older cultures that went by boat and supposedly got in there, where they ran into the vegetation got more and more lush as they got to the North Pole, and then when they got in, it did literally turn into one of our many movies about the journey to the center of the Earth, and where there's older beings. And I've talked about this in different things for years, but I never decided to make any videos on it because it's like, well, it's just my idea. But my idea it was something I came up with called the Basement Club, which is any civilization, once it reaches its apex, and we'll use a Terence McKenna term, once novelty has run out, once there's nothing new under the sun or on the surface, we'll just flip those two, then that civilization has to make way for another civilization. Now, whether or not that civilization goes through a catastrophe or some sort of golden age, either way, you got to get off the dance floor. Right? So what's the saying that they say? You don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here. And I think any surviving members of older versions, because I firmly believe, at the very least, that we are not the first civilization to rent this apartment. Anyone has any doubts in that, look at the sunken cities off of Japan or India, or look at the pyramids, how old they really are, or the Bosnian pyramids. There's so many out there. And once that civilization leaves, they're allowed limited contact with the surface, but they have to go somewhere. So where are you going to go? Again, subterranean systems can be extremely comfortable. And why not? I mean, what's the difference between a subterranean system and a system on the surface that's enclosed? Is there really any difference? I personally, like, you're choosing between one apartment and another. And so I think that other civilizations absolutely are looking down there. The question is, what were they, the backstories are the most fascinating. What were they based off of? How long did they live? How did they end? We're talking about the theory of Atlantis and the continent of Mu were they, if we were based off of mammals, were there some that were based off of reptilian? Were there some that were based off in insects or aquatic? Take your pick, right? And could they coexist? Could it turn into a Star Trek bar where you've got multiple different races, or do they all kind of look similar, but it's the genetic code that really tells the tale? You could go either way with that. But I firmly believe that anything you see flying around above us is the advanced technology that is being used by older versions of us. And I'll go one step further, which is you're thinking, oh, that's a stretch. Oh, no, it's not so much. Because think what would happen if there was an apocalypse that happened here, right on our world, our civilization. And we'll just take one of the fallout, the heavy-duty fallout shelters, like, say, Cheyenne Mountain out in Colorado. Now, a bunch of military are going to go in there, seal the door up, and hey, within a very short amount of time, civilization withers to nothing because with our food distribution system the way it is, all you have to do is shut down the trucks and that's it. Nobody farms anymore. People would run out of food in 2 seconds. So within a matter of a couple generations, the civilization would turn into a survival civilization. It'd be this post-apocalyptic civilization. And think of the things that would be lost in those 2 generations. We're talking, generations, 20, 25 years. So 50 years, think of all the things that would be lost. Like history. That's one of the first things you throw out the window. Language would be altered. Technology would be severely reduced. Who's going to teach anybody about tech? Once the batteries run out, you're back to the 1800s, the mid 1800s, really. And a lot of it is lost. And then all of a sudden, let's say 50 years later, people in Cheyenne Mountain decide that they're going to let their helicopters out and start flying around. You're going to have kids or people, that are, once you reach a certain age, they're going to have no idea what they're looking at. Never seen a helicopter before in their life. It might as well be gods. It might as well be angels, or metal birds, or whatever you want. Take your legend pick there, and it's fascinating how quickly things can change in that regard. So I think that everybody else out there is just us. It's just if we're version 7, who was version 6 and version 5? And of course the big question, who was version 1? And if you're into the whole biblical thing, you probably got a few ideas on that.
Yeah, I also think that potentially the oceans are other gateways into the earth. I think that is made obvious by the visual that people have seen how craft come out of the water. They're going somewhere, or at least some kind of underground. But there's tramways underneath us. There's underground bases underneath us. There's even sightings of submarines emerging from lakes that border Nevada and California, and then they go back down again. So there's something that connects the oceans in this massive connection. So. Oh
yeah, definitely. And you got to remember that the only thing, because a lot of people, in fact, I'm looking at one of my thumbnails right now. I was going to do it because if you're old enough, you remember the cartoon show called The Jetsons, which was the future version of the Flintstones, and everybody had flying cars. That was the big thing. Those cool little flying cars that never ran out of gas, and great big huge windshields, and they were perfect. It was like, wow, I can't wait to get one of those. We should have had flying cars by now. And really, any UFO technology is based on this. It's based on the UF engine, the Unified Field Engine, which is based on the unified field, the equation that has never been released that Einstein supposedly was working on. And I think he finished, but he wasn't going to let us have it, which was the balance between electromagnetic waves and gravitational waves. And if you had a power source that could manipulate these 2 frequencies, then you could have a craft that could basically fly at any speed and with instant velocity with no g-forces, which is it's amazing. Plus, it's an all-in-one vehicle. You even try to introduce a vehicle like that into our technology now. Well, one, you couldn't anyway, because once you have that, then you know where you are, because the first thing you do is you just crank it and see how far it can go up. And once you realize what the world really looks like, well, then the jig is up. But the other thing is, if you try to release a technology like that now, the world economy would just self-implode, because it's an all-in-one vehicle. The standard UFO model, which we all know and love, is a car, it is a submarine, it is a spaceship, it is an airplane. It replaces all these things. It's like the iPad. They call it the iPad, like the everything killer, or the smartphone, the everything killer. And it's killed off a lot of smaller industries. But the UFO engine would kill off all the major industries. I mean, you're talking about simultaneously killing off rail, airplane, car, ship, and submarine, rendering all obsolete literally overnight. No, we couldn't survive that economically. There's too many industries tied to it, including the military. The military would have to rebuild from the ground up.
Have you ever seen a connection with the Mariana Trench at all, with subterranean?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, there's probably some entries down there to do different things. I mean, ocean entries would be quite convenient because, one, we had our deep sea bathyscaps. The deep sea vessels are very limited and very slow moving. And the only people that can get down to any depths are the military, and they can keep a secret for the most part. Just if you just not show things on certain radars. So at that point, you just create some sort of, again, electromagnetic field, some entrance that doesn't allow the water through, or treat it kind of like a toilet thing where pressure keeps it going, and that's it. And you've got it, and then you don't have to worry about going into weird caves or flying too far north and too far south. You can just use the ocean, and since the ocean is everywhere, why not? And there's plenty of Navy personnel that have mentioned sightings over the years. Big giant craft that are coming in and out of the oceans, and maybe that's one of the keys when it comes to the oceans. Maybe the bigger craft have to use those because otherwise you're getting too close to land, and it would be too visible.
Well, I know that Bush Jr., when he was in office, he made the Mariana Trench off limits to everyone, and it's only a selected few of the military that are allowed to go there. So
Sure.
There's got to be something up with that. Well,
maybe.
Go ahead.
The movie The Abyss, one of James Cameron's first from the late 80s, kind of touched on that, where in fact, you wonder where they got that, because I think wasn't Bush in office in 1988, 89, where there was this deep sea. The climax, the last hour of the movie was there was a giant spacecraft at the bottom of this very, very deep place of the ocean, and this private oil firm accidentally ran into it because there was a military conflict up top. And sure, why not? Again, if you have a UF engine, pressure doesn't mean anything to you. It's the field can hold anything. So water pressure, now granted, they move a lot slower underwater. They don't move 5,000 miles an hour underwater, but at the same time, you're still moving very, very fast. I mean, I've still heard reports of several hundred miles an hour under the water, which is extremely fast. The fastest boats I think we have can't even break 200. And that's on the surface.
Yeah, I understand that some of the torpedoes, the theory of they have a little air bubble on the front of the tip when it goes through the water, and they literally can go several hundred miles an hour. It somehow reduces the friction, so I think that it is possible. Now, the area you live, is there a lot of UFO sightings in that area?
The Northwest isn't as much, but I think that's mostly because of visibility issues. Where I'm from, where I spent the last 20 years, which was in Colorado, so Colorado has 300 sunny days a year. So Colorado's great for that and it's clear. It's it's high altitude, 5,000 feet minimum for most parts, and so it's great visibility to see all sorts of stuff. That's where I did some wonderful night vision sighting. Out here in the Northwest, though, there's a place down south of Seattle that gets 220 overcast days a year, which is, means you're not seeing anything really. It's very, very very, very limited to what you can do here. I mean, I've gone on some clear nights and I have seen things, sure, but I have to wait for the clear nights, whereas in Colorado, you don't have to wait at all. I mean, most nights are clear. Yeah. Colorado is technically a high desert.
We're pretty much in the same area, so we've just been hammered by rain again and again and again.
I've never seen rain like I have this year.
Yeah.
Ever.
It has been incredible. So you've got a website and you've got lots of videos for documentation. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. The website, which I started based on my original video series, which was just a thought experiment that went horribly wrong, and I put out there, it was called Flat Earth Clues. And the website I built because Coast to Coast had interviewed me almost immediately, which I thought was odd. and they were upset that I didn't have a website. So it's like why would I have a website? I didn't even think this thing was going to catch on. So the website is called enclosedworld.com, because not only do I believe that the world that we live on is flat, I believe that it is a giant enclosed system, like a terrarium / planetarium / wildlife preserve / Truman Show / Hollywood backlot. It's basically you're in a building, is what I'm saying, and the building is so big that you can't see the boundaries, and we figured it out. The government figured it out in the 1950s, and they decided not to tell anybody. The videos, all the videos, if you go online, all you have to do is go to YouTube. That's probably the easiest way, and type in, if you want to see my stuff, type in Flat Earth Clues, 3 words, Flat Earth Clues, or you can just type in Flat Earth and you can see everybody's, and there's a huge amount of content now. I'm just envious of anybody that gets into this concept now, because the wall of content, you'll lose sleep for weeks. And I got to warn the people that are listening, if you try to get into it, first off, if you are happy with the life that you're living and you don't want to mess with it, sort of the Neo-Matrixy thing, don't look at this. Don't do it. But if you do, I'm not going to be held responsible, because you are going to lose a whole bunch of sleep, because it completely messes with your normalcy bias, and you'll think you've gone crazy for a while there. But once you come out the other end, it's a fun ride.
Yeah, well, it took a couple years for me to transition over. I first looked at it and thought about it, and then finally there was just a day, it's got to be. And so that was why I had you on a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Do you have some contact information in case someone's got a question?
Sure, you bet. You can email me. I've only had one email in my life, except for corporate emails, and that is msargent23@comcast.net. And if you don't remember that, that's fine, because it's literally in the description page and of every video I make, and it's on the end of pretty much every video I make. My phone number, if you want to call and leave phone messages, is 303-494-6631 or 720-897-6111, and those numbers are also out there. And again, everything goes to voicemail. I have to screen. I put my phone number in literally the first video I made, and thinking, because I want to say, if anyone thinks they can prove Flat Earth wrong, go ahead and call me. And nobody called me to everyone just called me thanking me, and then the interviews and stuff started happening. So yeah, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me is by email. Email is probably quicker, because I can get through them faster. Phone messages, I appreciate all the phone messages, and if anyone wants to to talk to me about other things, just either way.
Right. I didn't get a chance. I've been very, very busy to get your stuff up on my site on Tinfoil Hat Club, but I will do that tonight, and I'll confirm all the information on the website. So as I close out here, is there something you want to finish out with?
Yeah. This thing has gotten so big. Let me close with a what you could be missing type of thing. In case you've been hiding under a rock for the last better part of 2 years now, something's really been happening with our civilization, which is, if you typed Flat Earth into a search engine, even in the beginning of 2015, you would have gotten maybe 50,000 results. You type Flat Earth in now, you sort by upload date, we're pushing about 17 million. That's a pretty big jump, and you're thinking, well, what's that compared to? Okay, type in Donald Trump, the most talked about president going to be of all time before it's over. He's coming in at about 18 million, and we're doing that without any marketing dollars at all. And it's gotten so big that, heck, there's a conference, the Flat Earth International Conference. There's a tour, a Flat Earth International tour that's happening in Europe already, and the Americans are going to do a Flat Earth International Conference here in the fall in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we've already got the guest speakers set up, and it's selling tickets, and it's going to be a great thing. If anyone wants to check it out, go to FE, otherwise known as Flat Earth, so FE2017.com.
Yeah, I know when Obama was in office, he even made comments on that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, you were also saying something about basketball or something. Is that?
Oh, yeah. When you go to, and this happened actually shortly after the last interview I did with you, shortly after that happened, well, first off, there was a guy that went into the hills in Los Angeles in an orange jumpsuit and a hard hat and carved in a hillside in giant 10-foot letters or whatever it was, Google Flat Earth, which was interesting. I thought that would have been a good enough story for the week. But a couple days after that, the NBA's current reigning champion, NBA point guard Kyrie Irving, came out during a podcast, and he's known for being into conspiracies and graduated from Duke, and said that he was a flat earther. And he said, yeah, NASA's full of crap, and I'm totally on board. And he did this just before the All-Star game. So when he landed, all these reporters were waiting for him because the All-Star is all about the media. And then his teammate LeBron James comes in and doesn't condemn him for it. Draymond Green starts talking about it. And then immediately all the sports stations, ESPN just ran, every show they had. Time was, 120 Sports, First Take, The Jump, Sports Nation. They all started talking about it. And just when I thought I was going to settle down a little bit, and of course, they drug Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it was on Bill Maher, and I'm listening to Mike and Mike. Just when it started to settle down a little bit, then Shaquille O'Neal, the living legend, Hall of Fame NBAer, he came out during one of his podcasts and said he was into flat Earth. And that generated a huge amount of controversy. Now, did he come backpedal 5 days later? Yes, he did. And he did it on national television, and it looked very scripted, but it didn't really matter. It took him 5 days to backpedal. It's not like he did a media blackout. It took him that long before his agent finally convinced him. It's like, look, Shaq, you make $20 million a year in endorsements. You don't even play anymore. So you might not want to mess with that. And he's right. A lot of money is involved there. And so Shaq backpedaled a little bit. But the mainstream media exposure was massive. And that was, just a couple months ago. Not even a couple months. It was huge what happened. And so we've been riding this wave now, this big push. And the timing couldn't have been better, because that's when all of a sudden we started pushing the conference, and so many more, millions and millions and millions of people. I mean, heck, Kyrie Irving alone has millions of Twitter followers. Just him, let alone the other guys that are out there. So and it's out there permanently. So if you type in flat Earth into just into Google, you'll run into a lot of celebrities recently, which is mostly athletic, which is an interesting thing. But it made sense because, especially with basketball, they're on the road a lot, which means they watch a lot of media, and can't wait to see if anybody, because baseball season's just starting up. Hope a few baseball players jump in on this.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for being on tonight. It's been a couple of months, and when we did the Flat Earth, in fact, if you go back to the archives, that you'll find that, and I think that you also made a video of that show too, or that's what you've been doing, and you'll probably do one of this as well.
Yeah.
Right.
I take the interview, and then I put a bunch of Flat Earth slides behind it. I don't sync it up with anything because it just takes too long.
Sure.
And then I put it up on YouTube on my YouTube channel, so you'll be able to find it. You can go to my YouTube channel. It's called Mark K. Sargent, but again, it's not as easy as to remember as just typing in flat Earth clues, and eventually you'll get to me.
Right. Okay. Well, then when you have something, your new projects or whatever you're doing, we'll have you back. Does that sound pretty good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you.